What do you think the COVID and the lockdowns, this whole crisis, how do you think this will affect the global supply chain, and what's the long-term effect of that on the US economy? Because we've been pretty internationally or globally integrated up until this point.
Well, it's already affected it. I mean, you can look around and see there are a lot of goods that are in short supply right now. A lot of things are hard to get. It takes a long time to get them, and the prices are already gone up. And I think a lot of these supply chain bottlenecks, it's going to show up even later down the pipeline because a lot of stores maybe still had some inventory left over. The problem is, how do you replace it when the supply chain is bogged down and you haven't had factories that have been in production? So I think it's going to be, the perfect storm for the point of view of higher consumer prices, because just as consumers are maybe going to be going back to work and also are going to be getting another round of stimulus money, you're going to really start to see the goods shortages manifest themselves. So people are going to have more money to buy stuff, but there's going to be less stuff available to buy. And by the way, the US dollar continues to fall. It's at a new low for the year today. It's within maybe 2 percentage points of hitting a 6-year low. I think next year it's going to collapse to a record low. And as the dollar plunges, the cost of everything we import is going to go way up. And by the way, our trade deficits are now at all-time record highs. They've never been this large. So we lost the trade war that we just fought because our trade deficits are larger now, particularly with China, than they were before we declared war. But all these goods that we now depend on more than ever from foreigners are about to be more expensive than ever because the dollars that we need to pay for these goods are losing value. And so we're going to need a lot more of them to buy those things. And of course, a lot of Americans won't have enough dollars to buy, and so they're going to have to do without.
Do you think this declining American dollar and the inflation that's happening as a result of the lockdowns and some of these government measures, do you think that is contributing at all to how Bitcoin is performing? I just saw it cross, I'm not sure when this is going to air, but today it crossed an all-time high of 23,000.
Well, I think it is certainly contributing to the marketing campaign behind Bitcoin, right? The whole idea is that the dollar and other fiat currencies are going to collapse, that we're printing too many of them. We have quantitative easing. I mean, all the things that I've been warning about, that's all true. And if people are worried about these things, they should be, buying gold. But of course, if you have Bitcoin you're trying to get rid of, the idea is to try to convince people to buy your Bitcoin instead of buying gold. And so they're using what's happening to the dollar as a rationale for telling people, hey, you need to escape the falling dollar, buy Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. But really, they're trying to convince people to go from the frying pan into the fire. I mean, even though the price of Bitcoin is going up now, bubbles always go up, right? Prices go up until they collapse. I think the fundamentals of Bitcoin are nothing like gold. I don't believe a lot of the hype. I don't think the institutions are flocking to Bitcoin in any way, nor do I think people are selling their gold to buy Bitcoin. I think most people who are buying Bitcoin have never owned gold and probably never would have owned gold, but they are speculating in Bitcoin. I think it's interesting. You mentioned how, CNBC no longer has me on the air. The biggest advertiser on CNBC is Grayscale, which is the Bitcoin trust. I mean, they advertise nonstop. I mean, they probably spend, I'm guessing, maybe 5 times as much as their next biggest advertiser. And so in exchange, I think CNBC, they have a quid pro quo where they will have constant bullish coverage of Bitcoin without any bearish opinions allowed to be expressed on the air. So they have one Bitcoin bull after another coming on as if everybody on Wall Street is bullish on Bitcoin, and they're not. It is a very minority opinion. And also, I thought it was interesting that the main reason that CNBC stopped inviting me on was because they disagreed with my view on fiat money, on the Federal Reserve, on the US economy and inflation. They thought I was fear-mongering. They said, look, we don't want you on our air to talk about a currency crisis and why people should buy gold, right? Because this has no place in mainstream television, right? People should just buy the US stock market and the US bond market, and all this gloom and doom has no place on our air. Except they allow the Bitcoin people to say the exact same thing over and over again, just so long as they tell people to buy Bitcoin and not gold. And when I used to go on CNBC, anytime I mentioned gold, somebody would say, Peter, come on, you're just saying gold because you're trying to sell gold. You're talking your book, right? That's the only reason. Meanwhile, gold is such a big market. Nothing I said on CNBC would affect the price. You get these guys that are running crypto businesses coming on there giving pie in the sky forecasts of $1 million Bitcoin. And I've never once heard anybody on CNBC question their objectivity or say, hey, wait a minute. I mean, don't you own a bunch of Bitcoin? Isn't your entire livelihood based on Bitcoin? And by the way, since Bitcoin doesn't actually do anything, the only way the price of Bitcoin can go up is if somebody else buys it. And the only reason they're going to buy it is because they think somebody else will pay a higher price. You know, now people say, well, that's true with every asset. No, it's not. You can buy a bond and collect interest. You can buy a stock and collect dividends. You can buy real estate and you can collect rents. You don't get anything when you own Bitcoin. Now, someone could say, well, that's the same thing with gold. Well, yes, but I can use gold. Gold could be used as a metal. It can be fashioned into jewelry. It can be used in electronics. And to the extent that I'm holding it in a bullion, it's because I'm storing that for future use in electronics or jewelry or dentistry or wherever it's going to be used in. So gold is an actual commodity that has a use. Stocks, bonds, real estate are investments that throw off returns. And even if you buy a stock that doesn't pay a dividend, it has earnings that it's reinvesting and growing its business, and it may eventually pay a dividend. Bitcoin will never earn anything, will never pay anything. Bitcoin does not function as a medium of exchange because it's a lousy medium of exchange. It doesn't function as a store of value because it has no value to store. It is nothing. And I think this will go down as probably one of the greatest investment frauds and successful pyramid schemes for the promoters who got in early and really cashed out and made a fortune off of the greed and ignorance of the general public with a lot of help from news entities like CNBC, which I would not be surprised if when the dust settles and a lot of money is lost, especially maybe in retirement accounts by people who have bought shares of the Grayscale Trust, I think the parent company of CNBC or NBC Universal, they better lawyer up.